In 1789, every sugar cube in Paris was stained with blood. In Saint-Domingue, a human life lasted exactly 7 years. The masters thought they owned property too broken to fight. They were wrong. Toussaint Louverture was watching, waiting, and measuring the wind, and the storm he was about to unleash would burn their world to the ground. History is often written by those who held the pens, but today, we tell a story written by those who broke their chains. This is the saga of the Haitian Revolution. It is the only time in human history that a population of enslaved people rose up, defeated 3 global superpowers, France, Britain, and Spain, and forced the world to redefine what it means to be human. Over this deep dive series, we aren't just looking at a rebellion, we are analyzing a masterclass in strategy, a geopolitical earthquake that forced Napoleon to sell half of America, and the tragic rise of a man who became a legend, Toussaint Louverture. If you've ever wondered why the map of the modern world looks the way it does, or how a single, impossible idea can topple an empire, you are in the right place. By the time we're finished, you won't just know about Haiti, you'll understand the true, terrifying cost of liberty. In 1789, a sugar cube in a Parisian cafe was a miracle of luxury. But that sweetness was a lie. To the French, the island of Saint-Domingue was a pearl, the wealthiest colony on earth. But to the 500,000 souls trapped there, it was an industrial slaughterhouse. Here, the laws of economics were written in human flesh. The profits from sugar were so astronomical that it was cheaper for a master to work a slave to death in 7 years and buy a replacement than to keep them alive. In this paradise of wealth, death was the only thing that was free. The masters believed this machine was eternal. They thought they owned property too broken to ever fight back. They were wrong, because in the shadows of the cane fields, a quiet coachman named Toussaint was watching. He wasn't just driving carriages. He was measuring the wind, waiting for the spark that would burn the world's most profitable machine to the ground. This is the saga of the Haitian Revolution, the only time in human history that an enslaved population rose up, defeated 3 global superpowers, and forced the world to redefine what it means to be human. It was a geopolitical earthquake that would eventually force Napoleon to sell half of America. Saint-Domingue was a powder keg of nested hatreds. At the top were the Grands Blancs, wealthy planters, the Petits Blancs, poor whites, and the gens de couleur, free people of color. Supporting it all were the masses of enslaved Africans. Toussaint was the anomaly, literate and legally free. He used his mobility to study the island's geography and the tactics of his masters. While the white planters were busy debating the rights of man in their salons, Toussaint was silently memorizing the call for a black Spartacus. By 1791, the rights of man became a virus. The masters were distracted by political infighting in Paris, unaware that the people they called chattel were finally ready to claim their names. The fuse was laid. All it needed was a single prayer in the woods to set the entire Caribbean on fire. Part 2. The Night of Fire. August 1791. A storm was brewing over Saint-Domingue, not of rain, but of lightning and vengeance. In the thick woods of Bois Caiman, hundreds of people gathered in total silence. At the center stood Dutty Boukman, a giant of a man, and a high priestess. They weren't just praying. They were declaring war. The masters called voodoo superstition, but they were wrong. It was an underground telegram system. Under the cover of the drums, the enslaved had organized an island-wide strike that would become a revolution. Boukman's voice cut through the thunder. Throw away the image of the God of the whites who thirsts for our tears. Listen to the liberty which speaks in our hearts. Then, the signal was given. Within hours, the horizon turned orange. The sugar machine began to melt. Enslaved workers who had spent their lives bent over the cane stood up and set it ablaze. In just 10 days, the wealthiest land in the world was a scorched wasteland. 2,000 plantations were gone. 180 sugar refineries were reduced to ash. The white colonists watched from the safety of Le Cap as the sky turned black with the soot of their fortunes. They expected a disorganized mob, but they found an army. And in the middle of this chaos, Toussaint Louverture made his move. He didn't join the frenzy immediately. He was a strategist. He secured his former master's family first, ensuring his own moral ground, and then rode into the smoke to find the rebels. But the fire was chaotic. Boukman would soon fall in battle, his head placed on a spike by the French to scare the rebels. It didn't work. It only proved that the masters were afraid. However, a revolution without a leader is just a riot. The rebels had the fire, but they lacked a map. They needed a mind that could outthink empires. They needed Toussaint. The fire of 1791 had destroyed the sugar mills, but the ruins of Saint-Domingue were still worth a king's ransom. Now, 3 world powers circled the island like sharks: France, Britain, and Spain. This was no longer just a slave revolt. It was a global war on a single island. In this chaos, Toussaint Louverture emerged not as a mere rebel, but as a master statesman. He knew that rage alone couldn't win a war against empires. He needed a professional army. While others focused on revenge, Toussaint spent his time training former slaves in European tactics and bayonet drills. He was building the first disciplined black army in the Americas. But Toussaint's greatest weapon wasn't his sword, it was his mind. He played a brilliant, dangerous double game. Initially, he allied with the Spanish to fight the French, using Spanish muskets and supplies to grow his strength. But he was always watching Paris. When the French Republic, desperate to stop a British invasion, finally declared the total abolition of slavery in 1794, Toussaint saw his opening. In a move that shocked the world, he performed a sudden, perfect pivot. He abandoned Spain, rejoined the French Republic, and turned his disciplined army against the British and Spanish invaders. He crushed them. By the end of the campaign, Toussaint wasn't just a general. He was the de facto ruler of the island. He had outmaneuvered the greatest empires on Earth. However, his success created a new shadow. In France, a young, ambitious general named Napoleon Bonaparte was seizing power. Napoleon looked at Saint-Domingue and saw a lost fortune. He looked at Toussaint and saw a rival who needed to be broken. The Black Napoleon and the Corsican Emperor were now on a collision course, and only one of them would survive the coming storm. By 1801, Toussaint Louverture was the absolute master of Saint-Domingue, but he was walking a razor's edge. He didn't wait for orders from Paris anymore. Instead, he drafted a revolutionary constitution. It was a masterpiece of defiance. It abolished slavery forever and named Toussaint governor for life. In his mind, he was protecting his people from the whims of French politics. But in the eyes of Napoleon Bonaparte, this wasn't just autonomy, it was an insult. To the man who wanted to rule the world, Toussaint was a gilded African who had forgotten his place. Napoleon's response was a massive invasion fleet, 20,000 elite veterans led by his brother-in-law, General Leclerc. Their secret orders were simple: disarm the black generals, arrest Toussaint, and re-establish the sugar machine by restoring slavery. When the French sails appeared on the horizon, Toussaint knew the game had changed. He ordered his generals to burn the cities to the ground. "Leave the white man nothing but his own hell," he commanded. The War of 1802 was a nightmare of scorched earth and yellow fever. The French were winning the battles, but the land was killing them. Seeing the stalemate, the French offered a peace parley. Toussaint, weary and hoping to save his officers, agreed to a meeting. It was a trap. He was arrested, chained, and thrown into the dark hull of a ship bound for France. As he left the docks, he whispered a final warning. "In overthrowing me, you have only cut down the trunk of the tree of liberty. It will spring up again from the roots, for they are numerous and deep." Toussaint was sent to Fort de Joux, a freezing stone fortress in the Jura Mountains. The man of the Tropics, who had defeated empires, was left to rot in a damp cell without fire or sufficient food. He died alone in the cold in April 1803. Napoleon thought that by killing the mind of the revolution, he had killed the revolution itself. But he had forgotten one thing. Toussaint had already planted the seeds, and those seeds were about to bloom into a fire that even Napoleon's veterans couldn't extinguish. Napoleon thought the fire was out. He was wrong. Toussaint was the mind of the revolution, but Jean-Jacques Dessalines was its fury. Dessalines didn't share Toussaint's taste for diplomacy. He had the scars of the whip on his back to remind him that there was no middle ground with the French. When the French tried to restore slavery, Dessalines gave the order to rip the white stripe out of the French flag, creating the first flag of a new nation. His ultimatum was simple: independence or death. The war became a nightmare. The French commander, Rochambeau, turned to extreme brutality, but it only fueled the rebels' resolve. In the final, bloody showdown at the Battle of Vertières, the world watched in disbelief as an army of former slaves shattered the finest soldiers of the French Empire. Napoleon's dream of a new world empire died in the mud of Saint-Domingue. On the 1st of January 1804, the colony was gone. In its place stood Haiti, the world's first free black republic. They had done the impossible. They had forced the world to realize that liberty wasn't just a word for white men in Parisian salons, but the world would not forgive them for their freedom. In 1825, France returned with warships, demanding a staggering 150 million francs in reparations not for the land, but for the lost property. That property was the Haitian people themselves. This independence debt would cripple the nation's economy for over a century, a shadow that still haunts Haiti today. The Haitian Revolution was a geopolitical earthquake. It forced Napoleon to sell Louisiana to the United States, doubling the size of America. It terrified slaveholders everywhere and ignited a spark of hope that would eventually topple slavery across the globe. Toussaint's prophecy came true. The tree of liberty grew back, its roots far too deep to be destroyed. Today, we remember not just the tragedy, but the triumph of a people who refused to be anything less than human.